It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Failing to protect care homes, blaming a malign actor in Number 10. But the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock is confronted at the COVID inquiry over claims he lied.
There's no evidence from anybody who I worked with in the department or the health system who supported those false allegations.
The bereaved hearing evidence from the man some blame for their loved ones' deaths, as he claims he tried to raise the COVID alarm. Also tonight, Buckingham Palace considering all options as the King and Princess of Wales are named in unsubstantiated claims about the royal family. The shooting in Jerusalem blamed by Israel's Prime Minister on what he calls the same Hamas as the deadline for the end of the ceasefire approaches. The man who helped save the economy, the tribute to the financial crisis Chancellor Alistair Darling, who's died at the age of 70.
I could have been someone. Well, so could anyone.
And tributes too to the man who wrote and sang perhaps the nation's favourite Christmas song, the Pogues' lead singer, Shane MacGowan. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. Matt Hancock has faced criticism from many of the most senior figures in government service at the COVID inquiry since it began. Today, much of that evidence was presented to the former Health Secretary when he gave evidence, and he faced a very uncomfortable time. His claim that a protective ring had been put around care homes was not true, he conceded, after thousands of vulnerable residents had died there. Well, that wasn't the only time Matt Hancock was confronted by the inquiry's counsel. It's told that Dominic Cummings had described him as a liar. Mr. Hancock insisted I was not. The toxic culture was unhelpful in assuming when anything was difficult or a challenge. Senior civil servant Helen McNamara said Matt Hancock has shown overconfidence. But he said the same people were blocking the action that I was saying we needed. And over Sir Patrick Vallance, who was chief scientific advisor, claiming the former minister would say things with no basis in fact. Mr. Hancock said there was no evidence whatsoever about this. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, reports.
A discredited former health secretary, accused of incompetence, dishonesty, and ultimately being responsible for the death of thousands.
Do you like your way through COVID, Mr. Hancock?
Arriving at the COVID inquiry today to defend his record, his reputation, and remonstrate with his critics.
The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Matt Hancock has been heavily criticised for his handling of COVID and accused of misleading the Cabinet about the plans in place to deal with the pandemic. Today, attempting to recast himself as the driving force trying to curtail COVID in early 2020.
We were trying to effectively raise the alarm. We were trying to wake up Whitehall to the scale of the problem. And this was a problem that couldn't be addressed only from the health department.
The former health secretary also claimed he urged the PM to lock the country down on March 13th, 10 days before the first lockdown began. But he failed to provide a shred of evidence.
In that email on the 13th of March, to which you wish us to have regard, do you use the word immediate or lockdown?
I don't have it in front of me.
Do you use the word immediate or lockdown?
I don't have it in front of me.
Accusations of dishonesty have plagued Mr. Hancock throughout this inquiry.
Mr. Cummings, Sir Patrick Vallance in his diaries, Helen McNamara have made reference to you lying.
I was not. You will note that there's no evidence from anybody who I worked with in the department or the health system who supported those false allegations.
Denying he lied, Mr Hancock instead sought to shift blame onto a toxic number 10.
I think, unfortunately, the lesson for the future is systems need to be in place so that if there is a malign actor in number 10...
Do you mean Mr Cummings?
Well, in this case, that was the example, but there may be in the future. But if there are people whose behaviour is unprofessional, the system needs to be able to work despite that.
Outside, bereaved families clear who they blame.
It's especially difficult for me to hear the testimony of Matt Hancock. It was under his watch that my husband died. He was in charge of the care homes. He was dead because of the inadequacies of the health secretary. So my feelings toward him are not warm.
What Mr Hancock said today is unlikely to change many minds over his competence and conduct as health secretary during the pandemic. His account was less about self-reflection and much more about self-protection as he sought to defend his record, deny accusations made against him and deflect blame for mistakes during the pandemic onto others in Whitehall and number 10. And for the families who lost loved ones, not much closure to be found in Matt Hancock's account. This, a day that's raised more questions than it answered. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, we heard the government's protection, or lack of it, of the country's care homes referenced there. Today, Matt Hancock admitted that despite his assurances, they had not been fully protected. Our People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin reported from the inside of some of them in the early days of the pandemic and spoke to one care home manager about how she felt hearing the former health secretary's evidence.
Newfield Care Home in Sheffield at the peak of the outbreak.
How are you?
COVID was spreading fast from room to room and residents were dying. Facing accusations that the NHS was being prioritised over the care sector, the then Health Secretary Matt Hancock made this bold claim.
Right from the start, we've tried to throw a protective ring around our care homes.
That claim has haunted Mr Hancock ever since.
Because that's not how it felt in this care home and thousands of others. At the time, I witnessed for myself a lack of PPE, a shortage of tests for staff, and I also saw patients discharged from hospital into care homes without tests.
Giving evidence at the COVID inquiry, Matt Hancock was asked about his claim.
However you describe the protective processes you put in place around the care sector, they did not form an unbroken circle, did they?
It is quite clear from the evidence that Professor Van Tam is right.
You said we absolutely did throw a protective ring around social care.
Care home owner Nicola Richards was crying out for help as early as March 2020.
It's incredibly raw to me to watch that and hear what he's got to say, but we knew that anyway. We knew that at the time, that the words he was saying, they were just empty words. He was standing publicly and saying this when we knew it just wasn't true, it were lies.
What do you want this inquiry to learn to ensure that the same thing doesn't happen again?
I think lessons need to be learned. We should have been given the protection that we absolutely deserved. And for me, they've failed the most vulnerable.
Care homes were promised protection, but in so many cases, it came too late. Thousands of care home residents likely paid for that delay with their lives. Nick Martin, Sky News, Sheffield.
Well, tomorrow morning, the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock will continue giving evidence to the COVID inquiry. We'll take that live on Sky News from 10 a.m. Buckingham Palace is considering all options tonight after the King and Princess of Wales were revealed to be the royals named in the Dutch edition of a book about Harry and Meghan. That edition has now been removed from sale. Its author, Omid Scobie, said he had not included the names in his book, but that they had been known by journalists for a long time. Our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, has more.
This is what the King wants to focus on, the COP climate conference. But casting a shadow over the hellos and high-ranking handshakes are headlines and allegations he'd rather ignore.
How are you? I'm all right, thank you very much, just about.
Both he and the Princess of Wales are named as the two royals who allegedly made comments about the skin colour of Meghan's unborn baby. The claim made in this Dutch version of a new book. When the allegation first surfaced 2 years ago, the palace described it as fiction, and there's been no evidence to suggest it's true. The book's author, Omid Scobie, denies his manuscript named names.
I had never submitted a book that had their names in it, so I can only talk about my version. I'm obviously frustrated. The reality is, though, is that this is information that is not privy just to me. Journalists across Fleet Street have known those names for a long time. We've all followed a certain code of conduct when it comes to talking about it.
The palace is now considering legal action.
There's still no comment here. The King is on the world stage at COP, but risks being upstaged by the seemingly endless saga of the Sussexes. The palace is unhappy and deeply worried too about a taint of racism, even though it is strongly denied.
We haven't had any response from Harry or Meghan's team. And as for the working royals, they're carrying on. The Princess of Wales attending the royal variety performance. Buckingham Palace is considering all options, but well aware there isn't an easy option as to what comes next.
And Laura is at Buckingham Palace for us tonight. And Laura, the two royals are being named by many media outlets tonight. But what's the message from the palace?
I think business as usual, as we saw there, both the Princess of Wales and the King seen out and about today. The King in Dubai for COP, where he's due to give an opening address, a keynote speech. This could not be a more significant, a more important time for him as a seasoned climate campaigner. Don't forget, he was told he couldn't attend COP last year. This really is a big personal moment for him. His challenge, though, trying to shift the conversation back onto climate change. As for Kate, the Princess of Wales, with the Prince of Wales at that variety performance this evening, they are focused on getting on with the job, we're told tonight. So both Kate and the King very visible, but saying nothing. As I mentioned, all options are apparently being considered, but all the options seem to bring difficult decisions. And as a growing number of outlets are revealing the two names, for now, both palaces are still staying silent.
Laura, thank you. The latest deadline for renewing the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is approaching tonight. Unless agreement is reached, it will end tomorrow morning. Despite the deal holding in Gaza, Israel's Prime Minister accused what he called the same Hamas of carrying out an attack at a Jerusalem bus stop in which 3 people were killed. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, reports.
They make their way through the sand dunes heading towards the Mediterranean Sea. They're looking for safety in Gaza. They hope they find it here. This is Al Mawazi, a Bedouin settlement in the southern corner of the Gaza Strip. In reality, it's a barren wilderness, 1 kilometre wide and 14 kilometres long. But it's here the Israeli Defence Forces have said up to 2 million people should move as the restarting of the Gaza war seems inevitable. Some have arrived, building makeshift shelters that flap in the winds. These homes are built on sand. There are no floors. It already seems overcrowded.
Not everyone is here yet, and the situation is already catastrophic, let alone if they bring everybody here. Then there will be a huge catastrophe. I swear to God, already so many old people have died of diseases they just couldn't survive.
In this region, though, nothing is easy. In Jerusalem, mainly young women took to the street waving flags and holding up banners saying Israel stands strong. It follows a terror attack on a bus queue. 2 Hamas members killed 3 and injured 5 in a gun attack.
Well, there's a long history of apparently random terror attacks on locations in Israel, buses and bus stops, and this has been hit many times in the past. They're all linked to tensions in the West Bank, but now also the war in Gaza, and there is every expectation in Israel that will be more attacks like this one.
The Hamas link to this attack is evidence enough for the government here that Hamas can't be allowed to exist. It's unclear what effect, if any, it'll have on the ceasefire negotiations.
This is the same Hamas. This is the same Hamas that carried out the terrible massacre on October the 7th. The same Hamas that tries to murder us everywhere.
For now, at least, the handover of Israeli hostages and the exchange with Palestinian prisoners has kept the ceasefire alive. Negotiations are ongoing for it to continue. The United States Secretary of State is in the region visiting the West Bank and holding talks with the Israeli leadership. It's all about the ceasefire and talking to Israel about the next phase of the war. For the people of Gaza, a week of respite has allowed them to draw breath. But short of an unexpected and highly unlikely settlement, this war is set to continue. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Israel.
Well, 6 hostages who were released tonight have now been identified. We have images of 4 of them. From left to right, they are 41-year-old Nili Margalit, 29-year-old Sapir Cohen, 29-year-old Shani Goran, and 30-year-old Ilana Gritsuski. The 2 others are 18-year-old Bilal Al-Ziadana and 17-year-old Aisha Al-Ziadana. It's rare to hear such unified praise for a political figure from left and right, but Lord Darling, who, as Alistair Darling, was Chancellor through the financial crisis of 2008, achieved that today. He's died at the age of 70, and his former boss, Gordon Brown, said he was a statesman of unimpeachable integrity. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, reports.
The nation's worst economic crisis in a century. A run on a major bank at home. The global financial system on the brink. Alistair Darling, the man many believe prevented total collapse. As Gordon Brown's Chancellor, he was at the heart of the efforts to save the country's banking system.
We were faced with really unprecedented pressures in recent years.
Told that RBS was just hours away from running out of money, he intervened with taxpayer help. A decade later, the mild-mannered Scot reflected on the scale of the crisis he faced.
If the RBS had gone down, it would have brought down every other British bank, probably the American banking system in Europe as well, and there's no way we could have that.
His relationship with the Prime Minister was occasionally stormy. His frank warning that the country faced its worst downturn in 60 years infuriated Number 10 and provoked a fierce backlash that he never forgot.
The forces of hell were unleashed.
By Number 10?
I tell you, not just then, the Tories as well. The Tories, jumped onto the bandwagon as ever, and they all tried to join in. And of course it's difficult, but, you just have to, especially as a Chancellor, if you're in politics, if you have to be thick-skinned.
Despite those troubles, Gordon Brown cleared just how vital the former Chancellor was.
In times of crisis, Alistair was the person you would want in the room because he was calm, he was considered, he had great wisdom, he had a strong sense of what was right and wrong, he had great integrity, he was a person you could rely and depend upon.
The second act of his political life, saving the union of the United Kingdom, chair of the pro-union campaign in the Scottish independence referendum.
So as proud Scots who want a better future for Scotland, let's be confident in saying, yes, we are better together. Thank you very much.
The love and affection heard in tributes today, rare for a politician of his rank. Prizing unity, practising modesty, traits less seen around here these days. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Members of the RMT union have voted overwhelmingly to accept a deal to end their strike action on the railways. The RMT, alongside other transport unions, have been engaged in a bitter row over pay and conditions for more than 18 months. The new agreement sees RMT members given a backdated pay rise and job security guarantees. 3 police officers have been injured after clashes with Legia Warsaw fans ahead of their Europa Conference League game at Aston Villa. Missiles were thrown at police as the visiting fans were held in the coach park near the ground in Birmingham. The game didn't start on time, but no Liga fans were allowed into the stadium ahead of kick-off.
For more than a decade.
And visitors to Edinburgh Zoo had a final chance to say goodbye to the UK's only giant pandas today. Yangguan and Tiantian are now no longer on public view as they're being prepared for their journey back to China next week. They've been in the Scottish capital for 13 years. We must ensure the inclusion of the role of fossil fuels. They are not the words you would expect from the president of the world's climate conference, COP28, on its opening day. Handing the baton of climate control to one of the world's biggest oil producers has always been controversial with green activists. But the conference has already delivered one praised achievement for poorer countries, as our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, reports from Dubai.
If you think climate talks achieve nothing, have a listen. That's 198 nations applauding a deal where rich, polluting countries compensate poor ones for losses like floods, fires and crop failures caused by global warming. A huge win for the United Arab Emirates hosting COP28, but major tensions lie ahead, like this.
We must look for ways and ensure the inclusion of the role of fossil fuels.
That's the UAE, a major oil producer keeping its promise to inject pragmatism on fossil fuels into these talks. One strategy to deliver it is injecting carbon dioxide under the ground. 70 miles from the summit in the mountains of Fujairah, a fan is sucking CO2 out of the air, dissolving it in seawater and pumping it into rocks that have been naturally absorbing carbon for millions of years. These seams are made of calcite. When carbon dioxide dissolves in water, it gets into these rocks and it's locked up there permanently. What this project is trying to do is accelerate that very slow process, storing carbon dioxide that there's too much of in the atmosphere permanently in rocks like these. Sounds simple, only it isn't. First, it's pricey, currently around $1,000 to bury a tonne of carbon this way. And we'd need to be sucking up tens of billions of tonnes each year if fossil fuel firms, like the ones sponsoring this project, want to use it as a way to keep selling oil and gas. The world will probably need technologies like this, and oil majors might be best placed to deliver them, but campaigners are wary.
My biggest fear is that the interests of the fossil fuel industry, they are prioritized above the interests of humanity. And the only acceptable thing that the fossil fuel industry needs to do right now is to allow for a just and equitable phase out of fossil fuels.
The hosts will work hard to dispel that suggestion, and they'll be subject to gentle diplomacy by eco-influencers. King Charles greeted the UAE's ruler ahead of addressing the summit. More heads of state are on their way, kicking off decisive and potentially divisive climate talks. Tom Clark, Sky News, Dubai.
We saw there the United Arab Emirates' ambition to shape the world's energy future, but an investment backed by one of its ruling families in one of the UK's oldest newspapers is in question tonight. Our business correspondent, Paul Kelso, is at the headquarters of the Telegraph newspapers tonight. And Paul, already a controversial deal, but now facing potentially an official hurdle.
Yes, this is the proposed takeover of the Daily Telegraph, a newspaper that's been published since 1855 by an American-fronted but Abu Dhabi-funded consortium, Redbird IMI, which is proposing to pay off more than £1 billion that the current owning family owe to Lloyds Bank in exchange for one of Britain's most venerable newspapers. It's part of a deal that the Culture Secretary has now referred to Ofcom and the Competition and Markets Authority to examine several issues, including whether the deal would allow accurate journalism and freedom of expression of opinion in the newspapers under Abu Dhabi ownership. Central question, can a state be trusted, particularly one with a questionable human rights record, to run a British newspaper? Plenty of Conservative MPs think not. They've been vocal in the last couple of weeks calling for this investigation. So too have some of the rival bidders for this, including the owner of GB News, employs some of those MPs. Rupert Murdoch is said to covet The Spectator magazine, and the owners of the Daily Mail. The bidding group have got until the end of January to convince Ofcom and ultimately the Culture Secretary whether they can put reassurances in place to ensure that freedom of expression and fair media can continue under their ownership. And this matters. The Conservatives' in-house magazine is how the Telegraph is sometimes known. In an election year, who runs this place and the views it holds really matters.
Paul, thank you. Finally, you will be hearing his voice a lot over the next month. The man who wrote and sang the Christmas song seen by many as simply the best of all time, the fairy tale of New York. Shane MacGowan sadly didn't live to see this year's Christmas Eve or day, passing away at the age of 65. Our Ireland correspondent Stephen Murphy reports.
I could have been someone. Well, so could anyone.
He may have said he was sick of the song, both hearing it and talking about it. But there's little doubt Shane MacGowan's musical legacy is defined by the Pogues' fairy tale of New York.
The boys of the NYPD chorus still sing Go Away Brave, and the bells are ringing out for Christmas Day.
A snarling duet with Kirsty MacColl, an antidote to the saccharine fare so typical of the Yuletide genre. Radio DJ Dave Fanning recalled getting a sneak preview of the song from the Pogues' manager.
We listened twice and said, yeah, that's great. And then we went back to the stuff we were listening to, like Talking Heads of the Smiths, whatever it was, you know. And it became, undoubtedly, there's no question about it, it just is the greatest Christmas song ever.
News of the 65-year-old's death was announced by his wife Victoria Mary Clark. I am blessed beyond words to have met him and to have loved him, she wrote. Other tributes came from fellow artists and the political leaders of Ireland. Shane MacGowan was born on Christmas Day 1957 in Kent to Irish parents. Living in London, he discovered punk and founded the Pogues. MacGowan became known as a hellraiser, his excessive drinking and drug habits taking a toll on his health and his teeth. He reflected on his life with Sky News in 2008.
Follow your instinct. I mean, this is just my... Do what you bloody want.
In recent years, the singer battled ill health from his home in South Dublin, visited by the likes of Bruce Springsteen. He had recently recorded new music with the Irish band Cronin, today reflecting on his legacy.
Is Shane going to be bigger than James Joyce now, the literary greats of Ireland? He was a great poet of Ireland. Do more people know Fairy Tale New York that know James Joyce's Ulysses, or any of the works of W.B. Yeats?
Shane MacGowan's struggles with ill health, addiction and sometimes his own fame are now at an end.
I could have been someone.
I could have been someone, he sang. To generations of music lovers in the UK, Ireland and further afield, he was someone. A flawed songwriting genius who came to redefine the way our Christmas sounds.
I built my dreams around you.
Stephen Murphy, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Daily Express columnist and broadcaster, Carol Malone, and the Liverpool Echo's political editor, Liam Thorpe. It's his first time in the studio. Welcome. And amongst the stories, we'll be discussing the tributes to Pogues lead singer, Shane MacGowan, who the Star says was king of the Hellraisers. We'll be right back with that story and more. Do stay with us. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has told the COVID inquiry the UK should have gone into lockdown earlier than it did. Buckingham Palace says it's considering all options after the King and Princess of Wales were revealed to be the royal names in the Dutch edition of a book about Harry and Meghan. 2 Palestinian gunmen killed 3 people at a bus stop in Jerusalem earlier. 8 more Israeli hostages were released today by Hamas. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Express columnist and broadcaster Carol Malone and the Liverpool Echo's political editor Liam Thorpe. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Keep calm and carry on. The Metro leads with the controversy surrounding the royal book after King Charles and the Princess of Wales are named as the senior royals who questioned what skin colour Prince Archie would have. And that's the same with the Express, which asks if it's an injustice to name the royals in race row. King and Kate in race row leads the Mirror as they note the fallout following the release of Omid Scobie's book. The Mail says Scobie's defence is unravelling as he denies ever naming the royals. And the Telegraph says the palace are to look at legal action over the claim of being named as racist royals. The Times leads with the COVID inquiry as Matt Hancock admits delays in lockdown was a mistake. The Eye leads with the Labour Party stance on the EU and its foreign policy commitments. While The Guardian leads with COP28 held in Dubai as a landmark deal is reached to help poorer countries deal with climate crisis. The Daily Star pays tribute to late musical legend Shane MacGowan. And that's the same for The Sun with "And the bells are ringing out for Shane." And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Carol Malone and Liam Thorpe. Welcome to you both. Special welcome to Liam, as this is your first time appearing in person in the studio. Good to see you. Let's start with the Telegraph and the story that many of the front pages are covering. Their headline, Palace to look at legal action over racist royals claim. And this is following on from the publishing of a translation of Omid Scobie's book about Harry and Meghan. Carol, you take us into this first.
Yeah, I mean, I really hope they do look at legal action. I mean, this little peacock of a man has said something. He's insisting that he didn't put the names into the book, and his explanation for how they got there is farcical. But yeah, I really hope they do, because the royals have throughout maintained what they call a dignified silence. But I think there comes a point when silence is no longer dignified, because what it makes it look like is that they're not arguing with what he says. So is it true? People would say, it must be true if they're not fighting back. I think, you get to a point where, if someone keeps peeing all over you and you're saying thanks very much for that, you start to look stupid. And I think the royals are at the point now where they're beginning to look stupid by not responding to this.
But we are used to the royals not commenting, never complain.
Nothing has been as big to hit them as this, as the claims from Meghan and Harry, as the claims from Scobie. They've had things in the past that have gone, but nothing like this. And I think this needs an answer. And he needs to be asked to prove what he's saying. And already what he's saying is unravelling. He's already put the blame...
Well, he's saying that he hasn't named them.
It would be his argument to say that there were no copy of the book that was sent to Holland is farcical. What is he suggesting then, that the translators put 2 separate paragraphs in the books without knowledge? Is he suggesting the publisher put them in there? Because that's farcical, because the publisher had to mulch and pulp thousands and thousands of books. It doesn't make sense. This pans out very well for Scobie, apart from the fact he's looking stupid, because his argument is unravelling, but it's going to sell more books for him. the fact that the names are out there now. And it's interesting, Tom Bauer, who's a very trusted, royal writer, the man who actually does proper research on his books, he has actually said he doesn't believe these two names are the names. He doesn't believe it is Charles and Kate. He's saying there would never be a situation where those two would be discussing Archie's skin colour. And I think that's maybe why the royal family are considering legal action, because maybe he's got the names wrong.
Liam, what do you think?
I think possibly the most interesting aspect here is if the royals are considering, as the Telegraph says, considering legal action against media outlets around the world. We saw Piers Morgan kind of went first, not want to shy away from a controversial move, and he named the two royals first, and we've seen subsequent media outlets around the world go with that, and we often see the media act in a kind of a pack. When the pack moves, we all go in this kind of safety in numbers, but you'll see through some of these front pages that some have named the two royals, some suspected of being involved in this conversation, some of them haven't. What that would mean then if the royals were to launch into a legal row with, all of Britain's newspapers, how far does it go? And it'd be very high profile, very embarrassing as well in many ways, because you get kind of all your dirty laundry comes out in court, as we've seen in previous court cases. I just don't think they're going to do that.
But I don't think that the court case would be about race, because I don't think it's racist to discuss race. I don't think that a conversation between two people or four people or five people, I think people up and down the country, if there's a mixed race marriage, I'm pretty sure that the parents in that situation would talk about the likely tone of their baby's skin. I'm pretty sure the family would. I think they would, Liam.
It's very difficult because we don't know the context of the conversation.
No,
we don't even really know how the conversation took place, if the conversation took place.
The way that Meghan described it on the Oprah Winfrey interview was a pretty horrible way of phrasing that, if that is...
And do you think the two people that have been named would have that horrible conversation? I don't believe that for a second, because I don't believe Charles would think that, and I certainly don't believe Kate would. So I think I don't think having that conversation is racist. And I've read so many pieces from people of colour saying it isn't. It's just what families would do in that situation. But the way it's been written about, the way Scobie writes about it, the way Meghan talked about it, she made it into a racist issue. They called them racist. Even Harry said in the book Spare, he admitted...
I don't think she actually did call anyone racist in that.
She didn't use the word racist, but she was asked
interview.
the question, and it was implicit in the way she was asked and the way she answered the question. But, Harry's actually said that, in the book Spare, that he didn't think the conversation was racist. So what is this actually all about now? If Harry is saying it isn't, what is it all about? It's Scobie trying to get his name out there and trying to make a shed load of money.
The Metro, Liam, is saying keep calm and carry on. Do you think that is really the route that the royal family will continue to pursue?
As I say, I think they probably will, because, there's pictures here of Kate and William, who are at an event with the future Queen of Sweden, and they're obviously trying to give off the impression that everything is OK, that they're moving around as normal. The sources in the other papers suggest that, obviously, behind the scenes, everyone's absolutely...
I bet they are.
...furious, everyone's sort of going crazy.
Because here they go again, being called racist.
But as I say, it would be a massive move for the royals to take on the press, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about defamation, for example.
Well, no,
it would be against every news organisation.
And it wouldn't be taking on Omid Scobie, then?
But if you look in the Telegraph, it says that they're considering action after media outlets around the world began naming the so-called royal racists. So there is an implication there that they may look at where their names have been spread.
But they may very well so Scobie.
I imagine he would be an initial target.
Show us your proof. Where has this information come from? They would make his life very difficult, and that's what they should do. Not the rest of the world, but him, because you can't have people putting stuff out there when there is no substantive proof of it. You can't.
I think the one thing I definitely would agree with Carol on is that it seems incredibly spurious that that a translator would insert this detail into the Dutch version of the book. I think the theory of Occam's razor would suggest it's much more likely that it was in there already, and it was maybe supposed to be removed and it wasn't. But I think
this poor girl, Liam, she's called Saskia Peters, and she's one of the Dutch translators. And she's one of the top translators in Holland. She was given this job. And she's had the world press at her door today, harassing her. Yeah. And she actually said, she said, the names were there in black and white. Now, do I believe her or do I believe Owen Scobie? I believe her.
It would seem an incredible sort of act of sabotage for
Why
a
would she do
translator
it?
to include that detail. That's really hard to believe.
You know, that translator would be very aware of the ruckus this would cause. So there she is, just sitting doing her job. She's going to put the two... No, she's not going to put the two names in.
But isn't it self-sabotage for Owen Scobie, though?
Yeah, but he's
and
got...
likely
he's
to
got books
backfire tremendously.
Everyone, I mean, look, you know, every front page in the UK is talking about his book.
Yeah.
So that in some ways that has worked out quite well for him. You know, that in my opinion, there are much bigger stories happening, but everyone is talking about this.
But
now,
it is
so.
interesting. They're not talking about the book per se. They're talking about Owen Scobie. He has become the story, which doesn't necessarily mean.
But they say there's no such thing as bad publicity, especially if you've got a new book out.
Would you guys buy a book by Owen Scobie? Oh.
I only found out who he was about an hour ago. No, I've heard his name coming up, but I don't really understand how he's sort of got to this position and why he's so prominent. Really, you might.
But today he said it was one interview today. He said, you know, I struggle to be taken seriously. Well, yes, of course you do, love, because you know you keep on. You know, when he wrote the book Finding Freedom, he said he had no help from Meghan whatsoever. And it turns out he did, and it turns out she, under oath in court, she had to say that she had sent briefing notes ahead of a meeting with him. So you know, whatever he says, the guy, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, which is why I think the palace should look at legal action.
But the fact remains that the translation has been taken off the shelves tonight, though, hasn't it?
Yes. Well, I mean, a lot of books have been pulped, and that's why it's a nonsense that the publisher would have inserted these names, because the publishers now just had to lose a lot of money by pulping a load of books. So, I mean, that's nonsense as well. I mean, I suspect by the time we all get up tomorrow, this story will have moved on a bit, and his argument will have completely unravelled by tomorrow.
The front of the Mirror is suggesting that the palace, the entire royal family, is united in outrage over this whole episode, which suggests that there might be some action from the royal family for the first time.
I hope so. I mean, you see, you can't just keep launching horse manure at a family and expect them never to respond. And the reason so much has been written about it, and the reason Harry's got away with it and Meghan got away with it for so long, is because they knew the royal family weren't going to react. Well, maybe it's time they did.
I guess Carol's point earlier is that, you know, the longer you maintain that silence, there will be, you know, people around the world who will start to think, well maybe it's true. So I imagine there'll be some furious kind of PR meetings with all their PR advisors about if they say something, what they say. It's normally incredibly well crafted, isn't it?
Yeah.
And very. I know they obviously take great care over the words they put out. Everyone is waiting to see what they're going to say. So yeah, I guess we'll see.
I hope so. I really hope they do.
OK. Let's take a break there. Thank you both. Coming up, why the bells are ringing out for Shane, according to The Sun. Those tributes to Shane McGowan coming up next. Stay with us.
I heard the fire alarms go off, and one of the guys, the banksman on the ground, said, this is not a fire drill, this is evacuate everyone out. And there's a fire on level 8. I was concreting at the time, and I looked out my left window and I could see the smoke. So I just hoisted up and slewed round to put the concrete skip on the ground. And they said, yeah, you have to come out the crane as well. So I got the skip off and my chains, and I started hoisting up, and I slew back round, and I looked out my left window, and as I looked out my left window, one of the guys on the ground shouted out, there's a guy on level 8. And I stopped what I was doing, and I looked out on level 8 where he was, and he was waving his coat.
And you could see the area where he was standing. You knew he didn't have that much space.
No, he had about 2 meters. He was standing on about 2 square metres there. That wasn't a light. So, and when I touched down the cage, there was materials on the floor. So the cage started to tilt a little bit. Yeah, and the wind caught the block then, and it started pulling the cage over. And I thought, no, lucky it came back. And then I heard the cage go down, and then the banksman said, he's in. So, and then I heard the crowd outside. They were all shouting as well. I could hear all that as well. So, yeah, and then up and away, pulled the lever right back as fast as I could, get him out of there.
You're in the right place the right time in terms of you were in your cab. You were told to evacuate it, but you heard that someone was there, so you stayed in. And like you said, you've done that manoeuvre many times.
Yeah, I've been on that level before, yeah.
But from what you're saying, you were operating blind. You and your man on the ground worked together.
Yeah.
What was that like? What were the nerves like?
The adrenaline was out the roof. Like I can't tell you. When I got him back on the ground, put him back on the ground safely, and the ambulance staff was there. They took him away, and they took my hooks off, and I blocked up and everything, got the crane safe, and I just stood up, and I was shaky as hell.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, the Daily Express columnist and broadcaster Carol Malone, and the Liverpool Echo's political editor Liam Thorpe. Let's continue having a look at the newspapers, and just want to look at this story on the front page of The Guardian. Just to the left of the front page there, Hamas kill 3 at bus stop in Jerusalem, and this through the extension of the ceasefire. 3 people gunned down at the bus stop in Jerusalem. Liam.
Yeah, so it's just another really difficult sort of facet to the story that's going on in the Middle East at the moment. Hamas has claimed responsibility for these shootings, which obviously is significantly away from Gaza and what's happening there. We know that with the ceasefire in Gaza still continuing, for now at least, more hostages are being returned to their families as we speak. I believe it was 8 at the last time of checking. But this is kind of a reminder that there are issues over towards the West Bank as well. We know that there's been violence towards Palestinians in the West Bank by Israeli settlers. That's something that the Americans have condemned. And then obviously there's been the shooting in Jerusalem today. It's an extremely febrile situation in all aspects. And I think it's a reminder of just how complex this situation is. All eyes are on Gaza and what's happening there, and then suddenly violence has exploded elsewhere in Jerusalem and in the West Bank. I should say that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has condemned the violence that's been happening from Israelis to Palestinians in the West Bank. That situation has been bubbling over at the same time as what we've been seeing, the sort of destruction of Gaza following the horror of October the 7th. So it's an extremely complex situation. And it's in some ways it's marred the slightly more positive news, which is of this further hostage releasing, exchanging, and I guess the update on that is that as things stand, the ceasefire is ending tomorrow, but the hope is that it will be extended for 2 days, and the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the Americans are all certainly working hard to do that.
Yes, but officially the end of the ceasefire is tomorrow morning. But we've just got some pictures of the Offa prison in the West Bank, where we believe that 30 Palestinian prisoners are to be released this evening. That part of the agreement for the release of the Israeli hostages. Those are the very latest pictures. I don't believe there has been any release of the Palestinian prisoners as yet, but that could still come.
Well, it
in our
might,
time.
and it might not after what happened today in Jerusalem, the bus stop attack. You know, what it does is it just dampens any hope of any long-term ceasefire. You know, if the Palestinians are breaking it, and as Liam's just explained, that that the Israelis are perpetrating violence, on the other side, it just it's not just shows how complex the situation. It shows that kind of both sides don't actually want a solution, because no one's fighting for the solution. All around the world we're marching and we're saying, let's have a ceasefire, let's go have a ceasefire. But then we've had one, and look what's happening. This violence is still happening on both sides. Hamas always said, didn't they, that even if there was a ceasefire, they would still carry on fighting, and that's exactly what they're doing. But this just doesn't hold out any hope for a long-term solution, because Netanyahu will now say, OK, you're coming into Jerusalem to shoot people here. No more exchanges. It's not going to happen. So, you've got half the world working towards these ceasefires, trying to get get longer and longer. It's not going to happen. I just don't see the end game. Oh God, I've used the name of his book. I'm just
trying to get back to that.
No, I don't want to go back to that. I don't see what the end result in all of this is going to be.
I think it must be an absolute nightmare for those who are working on the ceasefire extension for something as tragic as that happened today, because it just ups the ante again, and you're going to get Benjamin Netanyahu coming out with.
Yes, well, he's reiterating the fact that pledging to eliminate. Hamas.
And it makes everyone extremely worried about what's going to happen. Yeah, exactly.
And did you see the release of those young girls today? I mean, that was just the worst sight. One of them, it was the 21-year-old who was snatched from the music festival. And it was just, she was terrified. They were leading her into a Red Cross bus, and the Palestinian mob was screaming. And, I kept on thinking, I wonder what's happened to her in the past 54 days. It just doesn't bear thinking about.
Just to bring in the latest pictures from Beytouni in the West Bank. This is the situation we're seeing at the moment. Obviously, disturbances there, and we can see fires being lit. I think that's an ambulance there in the background.
And Anthony Blinken has met with Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah, because this other kind of the tension that's rising is becoming an increasing concern for those who are obviously trying to work for a solution. It's just the tension is clearly really rising in the West Bank. I think 230 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank in recent times. So it's a large number of people who are being killed away from Gaza as well.
But this is where they're expecting the release of the prisoners, so we can see the crowds gathering there.
It just doesn't sound like it's going to, does it?
We're running out of time. We're not going to have time to bring in the tributes to Shane McGowan, but sadly today lost his life at the age of 65. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next hour. Thank you both for the moment. Let's take a look at the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the cold and mostly fine theme will remain, with overnight frost, fog and ice, but there'll be a little snow around. There'll be an extensive frost at first tomorrow, with some freezing fog in places. Wintry showers will affect exposed coastal areas, bringing a covering of snow and icy stretches. Low cloud and fog will be slow to lift across parts of central, southern and eastern England during the morning, but elsewhere there'll be plenty of sunshine. Most places look dry, but wintry showers will continue to affect northern, eastern and western coastal areas, with a few spreading inland across southeast England.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock tells the COVID inquiry lockdown should have been brought in earlier, and his department issued warnings which were not taken seriously enough.